Jefferson, great having you on the podcast. How are you today?
Doing well, Jared. Thanks for having me. Seen a bunch of folks in the contact space on here before, so uh, pleasure to be amongst them, I suppose.
Yeah, we're excited to add you into the mix. We'll be doing a lot more content this year, which I'm excited about. Um, a lot of podcasts, but also some non-podcast type stuff. So thanks for the kind words. Um, Before we get started, would love if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself, assuming some are just meeting you for the first time,
Yeah,
and then kind of lead that into an overview of Torque AI today.
sounds good. So I'll start with like the origin story, kind of like a first generation immigrant. So a lot of that is you have family and even yourself work in the trades because it's one of those things that's just natural. So I grew up in South Florida. A lot of people in South Florida in the Miami area end up having uncles, parents, et cetera, that work in drywall, handyman, general things. So that's how I got started. Fortunately, got to go to a bunch of fancy schools. So technically, I got 4 degrees from MIT, two from Michigan. I dropped out of my PhD, was doing cellular Legos, which kind of has a really kind of all-encompassing like arch, right? It's like I was working on architecture and building the fundamental building blocks of life, only to transition into industry and construction. So after I realized I didn't want to be like one of 10 people in the world that knew this very particular niche and being drawn to entrepreneurship, I went back to what I knew, and so I decided to actually start a general contracting company. So I went to join the family business, started knocking on doors. It was landscaping and odd jobs. And we just eventually built a small like family business. A second iteration of that was partnering with a friend of mine from MIT. He was a fraternity buddy. And we're like, hey, how about we do a tech enabled general contractor? He had built a data driven marketing research company before. So he was like the tech guy, and I was like the hustler on the construction side. And eventually we built like a little mini monopoly in the Austin area where we managed a series of brands across painting, tiling, home remodeling, and all sorts. And we built internal tech tools, so sales, marketing, quoting. We were even doing like 3D capture with Matterport as early as 2018. Full circle, wanted to get out of that because it was really hard to actually do the construction work. And so I shifted to just doing technology. And that's sort of where I'm at now with Torque, realizing that the biggest pain that's out there in the construction industry is enabling the back half of the equation, which typically goes overlooked even in construction tech. Most people focus on like the sales and the marketing and like just to the point where the handoff happens. But there's not a lot of technology that enable the field guys, the foremen, the superintendents, the laborers, the guys that are on the ground, like fabricating, assembling, and literally installing all the things. And that's where the money is made. So that's where I broadly wanted to spend my focus and time to like enable people in construction.
I'll share. You're in good company, by the way, for people that uh, either last second decided not to pursue or dropped out of a PhD program. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs that have gone that
Yeah.
pathway, and it signals that really great thing that comes next. So, really interesting what you're saying about switching from like the services to the technology. I think a lot of people find that over the course when they're building these businesses. Like I have a lot of relatives too in the construction space, and they always come to me and they're like, "Well, AI is it's going to take everyone's job." I'm like, "AI is not taking your job yet."
Yeah.
Like you're like construction. I've even seen like some of the roofing, like robots and things like that. Like
Yeah.
we're still so
Oh yeah.
compared to other industries, we're pretty far away. The tech side, we can use AI and like really streamline a lot of stuff, but the services component, like you were
Mm-mm.
saying, that's safe for a while. Um, but yeah, anyways, I'm really excited to have you here today. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to hop on. Would love to talk a little bit about you know go to market and construction, what you've learned so far, um, and any interesting tidbits you think our audience would love to hear.
Yeah. So for myself as a founder, I tend to be pretty like transparent and just kind of like candid. I also find that like construction is like a no bullshit type of industry. So trying to have that same ethos as the founder helps when you communicate your vision, the problem that you're trying to solve, and even to these potential viewers. So the broad problem space was enabling the teams that were in the field. So this is the foremen, the superintendents, and other field leaders, right? And realizing that often their day in the life is focused on blocking and moving production forward. They want flow, but flow starts from information. And sometimes this flow gets blocked because they might not have access to the right information, or at the end of the day, they spend 8 hours, maybe more. Like these guys are waking up at 3 a.m., trying to drive to the job site by 4. Therefore, they're the stretch and flexing and kind of like doing all the pre work at 5 a.m. Go through like 3 or 4 and then have 3 to 4 hours of additional work that they need to do to make information flow into the back end, right? So they're flowing because they need to unblock people to do the work. And then need to keep flowing at the end of the day by translating all that information into the back end. So you have RFIs, you have material shorts, you have daily reports, you have all this other information that needs to make it back into the systems. And I was like, can I target that? Can I focus on that? Because that is a pain point that these folks are living. And guess what? It's really amenable to the existing behaviors that they already exhibit, which leads into conversational AI and this big like, oh my God, how is AI going to revolutionize construction? And when diving into that, it's like these folks are very accustomed to picking up the phone. Or let me even take a step back. The typical demographic of a construction worker is that they didn't graduate high school, may have some sort of non-traditional learning disability like ADHD, dyslexia, or generally a class clown. But these dudes are fucking smart, man. Like when you put them to like the regular office worker, they'll talk shit to you and like they'll kind of go all around the world, like all around the place with their conversation. But I literally, or like a PhD type, will not be able to do half of the things that they do. So these are fundamentally smart guys, but with that demographic, they're not used to going on the computer. And so their words per minute are maybe 30 or less as they're coming back to their email, trying to type with their 2 fingers, which after literally being on site for several hours are probably tired. So that's where it's an easy way to plug in and just say, talk to your day, like tell me about what happened. Write up your reports in a very simple, like natural language way. And that's what Torque was generally focused on. Um, I do have some interesting tidbits though, because that little feature set of being able to eliminate that work, it ends up being more of a vitamin and not necessarily a painkiller. And so going to market in construction and trying to make a business out of AI models, you really need to understand that the business model is the one thing that uh, that is the most important at the end of the day. So I really find myself in this middle of a pivot where I've validated the product feature set, that the UI UX kind of paradigm is fundamentally going to shift and is shifting. And now we have technologies that enable us to design for this new user demographic. But that in and of itself is not an underlying business model. You always have to step back and say, well, what does the business need?
Now, I guess how do you de-risk some of these business model assumptions that you've had along the way? Like, it sounds like you've already figured that parts of it out because of what you just said is, essentially conversational AI is a feature, not the complete business pitch. Would love to hear any additional thoughts, though. I think we don't talk enough as founders about how do we de-risk situations. You don't have to give away trade secrets here, but would love to
Yeah.
hear your point of view and your thought process on that.
Yeah. And I think it's just an ethos, right? The traditional Silicon Valley narrative is create a pitch deck, create a narrative, get excitement to raise money. But you don't fundamentally always know with certainty, or you haven't validated a lot of the assumptions on which you are pitching. So you're raising all of this money to develop a product, to then go build a brand around it, to only then go talk to customers, which give you access to get to the construction site. And so you've built semblances of what this product looks like. You may even have some technical development, but then you're really not doing user testing until you get out there in the field. And that has two kind of slight nuances. One, construction's very hard to get access into a construction site just because of the nature of construction. It's dangerous, it's messy. People don't respond to emails like the superintendents and foremen that you're really trying to get a hold of. You're not going to find them on LinkedIn. You're not going to find them on like Instagram. You're not going to be able to do these traditional like uh, uh, advertising plays to get their attention. So like you just have a hard time accessing your potential users. So then you're like, oh man, I'm over here building in a silo, thinking or assuming that I know what these people are living. And the folks that are coming from the Silicon Valley traditional narrative may not actually have a construction background. So you get young, smart people, in their 19, 20 years old, really technically savvy, building a product, but the only thing that they're building that product for is to get access to the construction site. So this go to market motion and like fundraising is a little bit broken because you raise a bunch of money to build product to get attention, only for you as the founder to then build trust to get on site. And that's when you realize your business or their product or whatever is fundamentally broken or flawed because you didn't get to test your assumptions. You spent a couple $1 million to build a thing, to go test those assumptions to realize they're wrong, and now you have to figure out how to pivot. And in my way, it was really trying to hustle with conversations to get onto a project or as many projects as I possibly could without raising a shit ton of money, honestly.
Mhm. It's there's some great investors out there, but I've been typically critical of just kind of the VC landscape in general, not just for construction, but across the board. Now I do like how we're starting to see more strategics start up like internal funds, like you've seen with Suffolk Technologies and some of these
Hmm.
firms. Like that's awesome. We need to see more of that,
Hands
um,
down.
because at the end of the day, I've had businesses in the past where every customer is like signing up and willing to, pay something or like provide feedback. But then you talk to even investors, and getting an investor involved is like, well, we want a bigger opportunity at the time. It's the whole opportunity thing. Like when you really talk to the best investors, they care more about, you know, where the opportunity can go versus what the opportunity is now based on the feedback. Like it's really interesting, right? When you have certain people, I talked to an investor the other day that said, we only invest in billion-dollar companies. So then I said, well, how many of your portfolio companies are billion-dollar companies? And she's like,
Mm.
well, that's not the point. I'm like, it kind of is the point. If you only invest in billion-dollar companies and you have no billion-dollar companies, then you're doing something wrong. Or maybe you should, adjust your criteria a bit. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm with you. Would love to talk a little bit about, um, when like when to pivot based on feedback, and how do you change direction based on that evidence that you get?
Yeah. So I'll kind of frame this in which we started with the thesis, and like the go-to-market motion was initially just founder brand, basically hustling to get onto a construction site, right? Rather than building product and using that as like the flashy demos or whatever, because the funnel is still the same. Flashy demo, website, book demo, talk to founder, shortcut and just say, talk to the founder, build a brand, get on site. So I get on site, and I want to call them like an early thought partner, early design partner. We schedule about a week of just shadowing. They're like in the top 50 mechanical contractor in the US. Maybe in the span of a week, I was scheduled to walk close to $1 billion in total construction project value across different project sites. And this is not their scope of the work. It's just the scope of all of the contracts happening because it's large healthcare facilities, large buildings. And the assumption that we needed to test were, do we see users exhibiting certain behaviors that are amenable to conversational workflows? What's the frequency? What's the pain point? Like, what part of the fundamental workflow is it tied to? And those were the assumptions that we were on the test, because like we can find whatever we want on Reddit and get all these different types of validation, but there's a nice model that I use, which is called the confidence meter. The confidence meter starts with 0 being like gut conviction and like founder or whatever. And then it goes up to 100 being that the confidence meter is like you've run market experiments, you have test data, you're actually getting firsthand feedback from users. So our confidence internally was maybe at 50 or 60. We had anecdotal evidence, we had website evidence, we were on Reddit, we had a couple of important stakeholder interviews, but we actually had not talked to and been on a project site up until that time. Right. So it's like, how are foremen and superintendents doing this? And as I'm walking all of these project sites, I have to keep in mind you have to get to the core problem. So like ask why. Why is it that they're doing this? Why is it that they're actually writing these reports? Why is it that they're spending 2 to 3 hours after work or before work trying to get prepped? And it's because they have fundamental lack of information. And you're like, well, why are they lacking information? Well, oddly enough, this is where it's a hidden but obvious problem. It's hidden to the general masses because you don't have access to the construction sites, but it's obvious to the people who are on construction sites because they're like, yeah, dude, we print out so much paper every day. They literally have printers in the field offices. They have printers in the fabrication shops. And so you're asking yourself, can you automate RFIs and daily reports and some of the paperwork? Yes, you can. You can do that easily with conversational stuff. But like, are you fixing the underlying business problem and like the root cause of why they are then needing to do this information? So you're like, you have competent people who can communicate well because they need to communicate and write all of these reports. But then why are they needing to write all of these reports? Because the underlying business process are broken or disjointed or really not connected or not digitized. And you're like, holy shit, that in and of itself is the opportunity. Like the feature of UI, UX, conversational workflows, or using SMS and WhatsApp is a distribution. It's like it's an easy way to get distribution. It's an easier way to uh, get the folks in the field to adopt technology because they're already doing that. They can use their walkie talkies and you can port it into an AI in the back end for the RFIs. Simple. But how about the underlying business process? If that's broken, then all of this other fancy technology stuff, it's like a band-aid, and you're just really not. It's, you're not adding value to the business, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's far too often there's products. I look at a lot of products like the the old dual-sided mailboxes
Okay, okay.
where like they have a opening and like you can put,
Mhm.
and there's so many products that think they have this structure where everything's secure, but the back of the product or the front of the product, something keeps staying open and causing issues, and they just keep going down a rabbit hole trying to fix it. I don't know why I've picked that analogy, but it's been one that I've used for a while. Of it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're losing out on something. You're losing mail out the front or out of the back as a result of um, you might have distribution, but you don't have product. Or like you are 100% spot on with what you're talking about with WhatsApp and everything. I see that far too often with companies. And so let's take it a step back. What is your advice for other companies that are kind of going down this rabbit hole of, okay, maybe they have distribution, but that product is not where it needs to be? Because you do need, in order to eventually get to product market fit, right? You're going to need both to be in sync. Would love to hear your thought process on that.
Yeah. If you have connections or can leverage connections or just want to hustle, try to focus a lot of your time initially on getting to project sites or hustling as much as you can to actually get to a project site. Like I came from the residential SMB sector. So the largest project that I had personally been on or managed was maybe $4 million like new build. So I'm generally aware of like plumbing, mechanical, electrical as like a general contractor. But the productization, like you scale that up 10x, and then maybe you start touching what life looks like on a commercial project. I didn't have that. So I knew that initially, like that's the one thing that I needed to do. So if you're a founder and trying to like get into the space, drive around, sneak onto a construction project. I've done that myself. Like uh, after hours, look around or just find a corner, observe some patterns. Like literally, just go to a construction site. Just do that. That's number one if you're trying to get into the space, right? So that's kind of like the go-to-market side. But on a product or like tech side, go back to some fundamentals and like some old school like systems design and like systems or domain architecture. Like there's the infrastructure layer, there's the domain layer, there's the application layer, and then there's the UI UX. A lot of what I think is happening, and I'm almost like 100% with conviction on this, is that conversational models in general, like AI, it's changing two things. It's changing the UI UX. So there's a new paradigm. Like you're going to have business moats around a new way to interact with technology. That's for sure. So like WhatsApp, SMS, conversations, even like Jarvis style interfaces, that's going to be a new software paradigm, like in way in which humans use and interact with software, which happens to also be very amenable to the demographic of construction. These like folks that are just like really not tech savvy and don't want to interact in that way, but they're smart, can really talk to you and like articulate their problem. So the UI UX is solid. It's a product feature. But then the infrastructure model or like the base layer, that's also going to get abstracted. So you don't, whether it's DeepSeek or OpenAI or Anthropic, the infrastructure model is going to be like swappable. And so there's not necessarily any value there. But there is a domain layer, which is now that you get all of this data in, how do you create an ontology, a taxonomy, the shared language around the business? So if you're as a founder from a technical perspective, don't focus on the infrastructure layer, try to focus on the domain layer and understand that the UI UX layer is a software paradigm that's going to change. And you have a lot of interesting applications that you can digitize once you understand the actual domain that you're building and pick a niche, specialty contractors. The one version of that niche, you could even go mechanical. Do you pick electrical? Do you pick prefabrication? Do you pick pre-construction? But the more niche that you go in domain, the better off you are for leveraging AI as a whole, right?
Mhm. Last question for you, Jefferson, before we wrap up here. What's next for Torque AI that really excites you?
Well, we're in the middle of a pivot, based on evidence and like going to market. So we hustled. We got to visit $1 billion plus in construction project value, and we realized that there's a hidden but obvious opportunity in the specialty or like the MEP contractor space, which is a lot of these businesses still function off of paper-based workflow. So at the bottom of the market, you have Service Tie-In, which is like a very big company, and that's for all of the SMBs. And at the top of the market, you have Procore for all of the general contractors. But there's this missing middle that doesn't really address the needs of specialty contractors who tend to have one of the largest portions of the of the installed value on a project, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And they have these complex workflows where they're pre-assembling material, doing all of the logistics, and then installing them on a project site. So they have design, they have prefabrication, they have delivery, installation, inspections, but it's all very disjointed. And that was one of the things that became obvious to me is like, that's the hidden but obvious niche, going after a specialty contractor, like integrated operating system. So the working thesis right now is like if it's a cross between like Procore and like Palantir. So Palantir is like the AI operating system. Can you develop a new integration layer, collaboration layer for specifically specialty contractors because they have been traditionally overlooked, but are the ones that are literally doing the installation of a lot of this work on construction sites.
I love it. Jefferson, I'm excited for future conversations. Please keep us up to date on everything that's happening. Love hearing from you. Thanks for being so transparent on social media, too. If anyone's not following Jefferson, follow him on LinkedIn. He shares the truth, no BS. Really appreciate that.
That's construction for you.
I love it.
Sure.
Jefferson, thanks so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jared. Thanks.